World of Warcraft Midnight has 3 entire raids worth of bosses, and every single one of them is hiding lore, mechanics, and design choices that most players never stop to think about. So today, I'm breaking down every raid boss in Midnight, what they are, why they exist, and what makes each fight tick. Starting with the one boss that technically shouldn't exist at all. Chimeras, a whole raid for one boss, that's what the Dream Rift is. You zone in with your 2 tanks, 4 healers, and 14 DPS, and there's exactly one thing waiting for you at the bottom of the Rift of Aln and Harandar. No trash gauntlet, no wing selection, just Chimeras. And here's the thing. Every other manifestation inside the Rift of Aln was deliberately dreamt into existence by Alnhara. Every single one. Shaped, intentional, born from a sleeping cosmic entity's subconscious. Chimeras was not. When Alnhara was ripped from her cradle, the resulting vacuum of chaos and void energy accidentally created something that was never supposed to be there. It's literally a cosmic mistake. The devs gave it the title the Undreamt God, which is the hardest name in the entire expansion, and I will not be taking questions on that. So how do you fight a god born from nothing? 2 phases cycling back and forth. During the ground phase, manifestation adds spawn and march toward the boss. Your job is to kill them before they reach Chimeras, because every ad that touches it gets consumed. And consumption isn't just a little heal. The boss recovers 200% of that manifestation's missing health and gains a permanent power stack. Permanent, not a soft enrage, a stack that never goes away. Every ad you let through makes the rest of the fight harder forever, which is, not ideal. Then the boss takes off and becomes completely immune to damage. You're just surviving, managing positioning, waiting for it to land so you can resume the actual fight. The whole encounter runs about 6 to 7 minutes, and it's a pure ad management check disguised as a boss encounter. On Heroic, they layer consuming miasma on top of everything. It's a minute long dough that slaps a 10-yard plague ring around whoever has it. Dispelling it clears nearby puddles, so now you're juggling ad priority, permanent stacking buffs, and spatial awareness puzzles where dispel timing actually matters. Cool. That's also a thing that happened. But Chimeras is really just the appetizer, the gateway encounter before the real progression begins. Because if you think managing ads against one accidental god is stressful, wait until you meet the Imperator sitting at the front door of the Void Spire. Imperator Aversian. Blizzard looked at a children's game and thought, yeah, this should kill 20 people instantly. And honestly, Jersium, they were right. Imperator Aversian is the first boss you'll face in the Void Spire raid, a 6-boss gauntlet sitting in the middle of the Void Storm zone. You need to be level 90 with a minimum item level of 220 just to queue into Raid Finder, standard gatekeeper stuff, but the fight itself is anything but standard. Here's the thing. The entire encounter revolves around tic-tac-toe. I'm not simplifying it for you. That is literally what this is. Every cycle, 3 Abyssal Void Shaper ads spawn on a grid, each one surrounded by void circles. Your job is to make sure those circles never line up 3 in a row. Horizontally, vertically, diagonally, doesn't matter. If 3 circles align in any direction, the game just decides you're dead. Unlimited waves of ads pour in, the raid crumbles, and you get to explain to your guild that you wiped because somebody failed a game designed for 6-year-olds, which is, not ideal. But before you even get to kill those ads, there's a catch. Every Void Shaper spawns completely immune to damage. You can't touch them until the raid coordinates a group soak mechanic called Umbral Collapse. Everyone stacks, eats the hit together, and only then do the ads become vulnerable. So you need the entire raid to soak at the right time, burst the correct ads down before new ones spawn, and never ever let the grid fill up wrong. Meanwhile, Aversian himself is throwing out Dark Upheaval, which slams you for 97,126 shadow damage on impact and leaves a ticking 7 damage per second zone on the ground. Not the scariest number on its own, but the real problem is March of the Endless. That one deals 110 shadow damage every single second, and you cannot dodge it. It just happens. Your healers are burning through mana, while your DPS are playing competitive knots and crosses against void monsters. Beautiful game design. Players were pretty vocal about this one being a massive mechanical jump for a first boss. Most first encounters in a raid ease you in maybe a simple tank swap, some light ad management, a dance you learn in 2 pulls. Aversian throws a spatial logic puzzle at you while simultaneously melting your health bars. Some people love the creativity, others called the tic-tac-toe system unintuitive, arguing that the visual indicators were clear, but the actual execution under pressure felt completely different from reading a guide about it. And honestly, both sides have a point. On paper, don't let 3 circles line up sound simple. In practice, with void zones everywhere, everywhere, add spawning on a timer, and your raid frantically soaking Umbral Collapse while dodging Dark Upheaval puddles, it becomes a coordination nightmare. But if you think a glorified board game is stressful, wait until you meet what's lurking behind boss number 2. Vorasius. Vorasius looks simple on paper, one boss, no phase transitions, no puzzle mechanics, just a big void creature standing in a room waiting to get hit, and that's exactly what makes it so dangerous, because this fight is a ticking clock disguised as a punching bag. Here's the thing, and every time Vorasius casts Primordial Roar, it stacks passive damage on the entire raid, not a burst you can heal through and forget about. A permanent increase. The first cast is barely noticeable. By the 4th or 5th, your healers are white-knuckling cooldowns just to keep people alive. The math is brutally simple. Either your DPS kills this thing fast enough, or the healing becomes literally impossible. There's no cheese strategy. You burn it down or you wipe, but the passive damage isn't even the scariest part. Shadowclaw Slam hits the current tank with Smashed, which increases physical damage taken by 50% per stack. The debuff lasts a full minute and it stacks. So if your tanks aren't swapping with surgical precision, the active tank just starts evaporating. One missed swap and your tank is sitting at multiple stacks while the raid is already melting from Primordial Roar, which is, you know, not ideal. Then there are the blister creeps. They spawn throughout the encounter and have to be killed against the arena walls. Not near the walls, against them, because when they die, they explode and break through whatever wall they're next to, which is actually how the raid manages its space. Kill them in the middle of the room, and you've wasted an explosion. On Mythic, the number scales up, turning ad management into a genuine logistical headache. On top of that, Parasitic Explosion periodically spawns additional blister creeps that fixate on random players. So now you've got someone named Cornelius frantically kiting a pulsing void blob to the nearest wall while dodging everything else. Hey Cornelius, north wall please? No, the other north wall. Great, you're dead. And then there's Void Breath. Vorasius raises either its left or right hand, and whichever one glows determines which direction the breath sweeps across the room. Miss the tell, and you're standing directly in the path of a room-wide cone that will absolutely delete you. It rewards players who are actually paying attention, instead of staring at their action bars, which honestly feels refreshing for a second boss. The whole encounter is deceptively elegant. There's no surprise phase or hidden mechanic. It's the same fight from start to finish. It just gets worse constantly. The Primordial Roar stacks keep climbing, the margin for error shrinks, and eventually it doesn't exist at all. But if you think a straightforward DPS race is stressful, wait until you meet Nexus King Saladar, because that fight adds an entire layer of Void Orb management that makes Vorasius look like target dummy practice. Fallen King Saladar. Most bosses in the Void Spire throw multiple phases at you. Force transitions change the arena. Saladar doesn't bother with any of that. He's one continuous phase from start to finish, and honestly, that's what makes him dangerous. No intermission to catch your breath, no reset moment, just you, him, and a steadily escalating pile of problems. Here's the thing, the fight revolves entirely around void convergence. Periodically, Saladar spawns concentrated void orbs around the arena, and these orbs immediately fixate on the boss. Your job is to kill them before they reach him. Simple enough on normal. But on heroic, killing a void orb applies an 8-second raid-wide DOT, and that DOT stacks if multiple orbs die within the same window. So if your DPS goes full caveman and nukes 3 orbs simultaneously, your entire raid is now melting from triple stacked void damage, and your healers are screaming into Discord, which is, you know, not ideal. This means you stagger your kills, you assign groups to specific orbs, you communicate timing, you treat every orb death like a controlled demolition rather than a free-for-all. It's the kind of mechanic that separates raids that actually talk to each other from raids where 20 people independently decide they're the main character. While all that is happening, tanks are dealing with destabilizing strikes, a stacking DOT that forces a swap at around 8 stacks. Forgetting it means your tank just evaporates. Meanwhile, random players get targeted by Shattering Twilight, spike line explosions that shoot outward from their position. You overlap too because nobody spread. Devastating. Then there's Despotic Command. Players get tagged with an AoE ring, and after 10 seconds it drops a healing absorb on them while leaving a puddle where they were standing. So you move out, place your puddle somewhere that doesn't ruin the arena, and get healed through the absorb. Except the floor is slowly becoming unusable, and nobody remembers where they put their puddle 3 casts ago. But here's the kicker. When Saladar hits 100 energy, he enters the Unraveling. During this window, the boss takes dramatically increased damage. This is your moment. Every cooldown, every potion, every trinket proc you've been holding gets dumped right here. All that discipline with the orbs staggering, all that careful puddle placement, it pays off in one glorious burst window where the health bar actually moves. Guilds that plan around the unraveling properly can shave entire minutes off their kill time. Guilds that don't end up watching the boss hit 100 energy while half their raid is standing in puddles with no cooldowns available, I don't know what to tell you. Preparation is the whole fight. A lot of raiders pointed to Salhadar as the sweet spot for early progression difficulty. Hard enough to demand coordination, simple enough that the mechanics don't require a PhD. One phase, clear rules, meaningful punishment, and a satisfying payoff window, clean design. Like, no gimmicks, just execution from start to finish. But if you think a single phase boss with some orbs sounds manageable, wait until you meet the two dragons that make you juggle tethers, breath attacks, and void spawns all at the same time. Velgor and Ezarak. Two boss encounters in WoW raids always sound fun on paper, you know, two big targets, cleave damage flying everywhere, your DPS meters looking absolutely gorgeous, and then you actually do the fight and realize the entire thing is an elaborate trap designed to punish you for standing 3 yards too close to your co-tank. Velgor and Ezarak are exactly that kind of encounter. These are two void dragons, and on mythic difficulty, both of them stay grounded during phase 1. That's the good news. You get to pump cleave damage into both targets simultaneously, which feels great right up until the mechanics start layering on top of each other like a sandwich nobody ordered. Here's the thing. Your tanks need to maintain a strict 15-yard spacing at all times. Drop below that threshold and the dragons trigger an enrage radius mechanic that applies reduced damage output and increased damage taken to everyone nearby. So your tanks are essentially playing a very high stakes game of stay away from me, except the consequences for losing aren't hurt feelings, they're a dead raid, which is, you know, not ideal. But the tank spacing isn't even the mechanic that kills most groups. That honor goes to Null Beam. This ability creates a tether between two players, and if you break that tether by running too far apart, it detonates null snap damage across the raid. So you've got one mechanic telling tanks to stay apart and another telling DPS to stay together. Meanwhile, Dread Breath targets a single player but damages everyone positioned in front of them. You can practically hear the raid leader losing their mind. Spread out. No, not that much. Get closer. No, not to the tank, and then there's Void Howl. This summons void orbs that continuously cast Void Bolt, creating persistent add pressure throughout the entire encounter. These orbs don't stop. They don't take a break. They just keep casting, stacking damage onto your healer's already crumbling sanity. Great, add that to the list, but here's where it gets complicated. The fight has 3 distinct phases, and each one fundamentally changes how your raid manages space. Phase 1 is the Cleave Dream, both dragons grounded, everyone feeling good about themselves. Then the later phases split the dragons apart, forcing complete raid repositioning mid-fight. Your muscle memory actively works against you. The Manifestation of Midnight phases introduce Shadow Mark, which deals 7,770 shadow damage every 1 second for 6 seconds. When it expires, it detonates to nearby players. So if you're stacked too tightly when someone's Shadow Mark falls off, congratulations, you've just chain reacted your melee group into the floor. The mechanic punishes you for being near other humans, which honestly feels like a metaphor for something. Here's what made this encounter genuinely interesting from a progression standpoint. Some guilds found Velgor and Ezarak harder than the penultimate boss, the light-blinded Vanguard. That's not supposed to happen. The 4th boss in a 6-boss raid shouldn't be breaking guilds that cruise through boss 5. But the combination of tank spacing, tether management, persistent add pressure, and 3 completely different phase layouts created a perfect storm of overlapping responsibilities that punished even small mistakes with wipes. The tuning expectations said mid-tier difficulty. The reality said good luck. But if you think juggling 2 dragons is chaotic, wait until you meet the light-blinded Vanguard, because that fight throws 3 bosses at you simultaneously and demands a 5th healer just to survive. Light-blinded Vanguard. Most raid bosses test your group. This one tests you, specifically you, the individual player, sitting in your chair, probably already panicking. The light-blinded Vanguard is the 5th encounter in Voidspire, and it's widely considered the moment this raid tier stops playing nice and starts asking if you can actually track 5 things at once without your brain leaking out of your ears. Here's the setup. You're not fighting one boss, you're fighting 3. General Amius Bellamy, War Chaplain Sen, and Commander Vanel Lightblood. Each one has a unique aura. Each one operates on an energy system that gates their abilities at 100 energy, and each one wants you dead for completely different reasons. Bellamy's Divine Toll sends Avengers' shields ripping across the arena, silencing anyone they connect with. Sen's Tyr's Wrath slaps healing absorbs onto the 3 closest players, and and Lightblood's Aura of Wrath ramps up holy damage across the board, turning every other mechanic into something that hits like it's been personally insulted by your health bar. On normal and heroic, this is already chaotic. You're juggling 3 bosses with 3 separate energy bars, dodging shields, spreading for radiance, making sure your healers can actually reach the people getting absorption shields plastered on their health bars. It's a lot, but it's manageable. Then you turn on Mythic. On Mythic, the encounter introduces a ghost mechanic. And I need you to really absorb this because it's genuinely diabolical. A spectral echo of one boss begins casting another boss's abilities while simultaneously empowering a third boss's active mechanic. So you get situations where Bellamy's Divine Toll is launching shields across the arena at the exact same time Sen's Tyr's Wrath is firing off. Ability overlaps that should never exist together suddenly do. It's like the developers sat in a room and said, what if we made the fight work against its own rules? And then there are the Avengers shields themselves. On Mythic, they hit for roughly 70 to 80% of your total health pool. That's not a love tap. That's you have approximately 1 global cooldown to get dispelled or you're visiting the floor. Coordinated timing and immediate dispels aren't optional. They're the only reason you survive. This is also notably the first fight in the entire tier where most guilds swap to a 5 healer composition instead of 4. That alone tells you everything about the damage profile. When your raid leader looks at the healing requirement and says, yeah, we need another one, the fight has made its point. But here's the thing that makes this encounter genuinely unique. No amount of shot calling saves a bad player here. Your raid leader can scream positioning calls until they're hoarse. Doesn't matter. At any given moment, every single person in the raid needs to simultaneously dodge shields, manage healing absorbs, spread for searing radiance, account for the ramping holy damage from Lightblood's aura, and maintain boss-specific positioning. That's not a team coordination check. That's a does Gerald in the back row have object permanence check, and Gerald usually doesn't. The community has been split on whether this design philosophy is brilliant or punishing. Some players love it, calling it the purest skill expression fight in the tier. Others point out that one person dying to an overlap on pull 97 feels less like progression and more like hostage negotiation. Either way, nobody denies it's the wall. Guilds that clear Vanguard can usually smell the end of the raid. Guilds that can't are stuck here for weeks watching the same ghost echo the same shield into the same healer who was standing exactly where they shouldn't have been. But if you think 3 bosses and a ghost mechanic sound intense, wait until you see what's waiting at the very top of the Void Spire, Crown of the Cosmos. Every raid needs a final boss that feels like it matters, and Crown of the Cosmos delivers on that front in a way that Void Spire desperately needed. This isn't just the 6th boss in a lineup. This is where every storyline the raid has been building toward finally smashes together in one encounter. High atop the Void Spire, Xal'atath is marshaling her dark army from across the Void Storm. She's been the puppet master for the entire raid tier, pulling strings from behind every corrupted king and void twisted dragon you fought to get here. But now there's nowhere left to hide. Turalyon, Eretor, and Illyria show up to back you, and the encounter becomes this collision point where Void Ambitions, Lightbound Intervention, and 20 very tired player characters all converge in one arena. Here's the thing, the lore weight of this fight is genuinely staggering. Xal'atath has been a slow burn threat across multiple expansions, and Crown of the Cosmos is the first time Midnight's narrative actually forces her hand. She's not whispering, she's not manipulating from the shadows. She's standing at the top of her tower with an army, and you're kicking the door down with 3 of the most important lore characters in the franchise backing you up. That's not a regular Tuesday in Azeroth, that's a crescendo. But here's where it gets complicated, and not in the fun figure out the mechanics way. Blizzard released a story mode version of this fight exclusively for this boss. You complete the Foothold storyline, finish the Charge of the Vanguard quest, talk to an NPC named Venzilian the Reality Cracker, incredible name by the way, and you get to experience the final encounter without any of the actual difficulty. You kill the boss. The raid cutscene plays, you get 0 loot, nothing, just the story, and the community lost its mind. The debate split clean down the middle. One side argued that raid stories shouldn't be locked behind difficulty walls, that casual players deserve to see the narrative payoff for an expansion they've been playing through. The other side argued that earning the kill is the story, that watching a cutscene you didn't struggle for is like reading the last page of a book and calling it finished. Both sides had a point. Neither side was particularly polite about it. The whole thing dropped on March 24th, 2026, alongside every other Voidspire boss. Raid Finder required a minimum item level of 220, but story mode existing as a parallel option for the final boss specifically, that was new territory, story, it wasn't a difficulty toggle. It was a completely separate narrative pathway that acknowledged some players would never clear the fight on any real difficulty. And Blizzard decided those players still deserve to see how the Void Spire arc ends. Mechanically, this fight is less documented than earlier Void Spire encounters. The community had plenty to say about the narrative implications, but the actual nuts and bolts haven't been dissected to the same degree as Light-Blinded Vanguard or Velgor and Azoric. What we do know is that it represents the thematic pinnacle of the raid's progression. You've spent 5 bosses climbing through Corrupted Soldiers, Void Beasts, Fallen Royalty, and Zealous Light Fanatics. Crown of the Cosmos is supposed to make all of that feel like a warm-up. Whether you fought through it on Mythic or watched the cutscene through Venzillion's narrative shortcut, the result is the same story beat. Xalatath's first major play in Midnight gets answered, the Void army gets pushed back, and the stage gets set for everything that comes next. But if you thought the Void Spire was the end of Season 1's raid content, you'd be wrong, because there's a whole separate raid waiting on the Isle of Quel'Danas, and its first boss is a phoenix with a serious identity crisis, Beleren, Child of Alayar. If you played Burning Crusade, this name just hit you right in the nostalgia. Beleren is one of the last phoenixes hatched from Alar's final clutch, and fighting it feels exactly like coming home to Tempest Keep, except everything is worse now and your healers are going to cry. Here's how the fight works. Beleren cycles between 2 phases on repeat, a phoenix form phase where you're fighting the bird directly, and a 30-second egg form phase where it collapses into an egg and you burn it down as fast as possible. Sounds simple enough, kill bird, break egg, repeat, but the encounter has a nasty trick baked into its math that turns this straightforward loop into a slow motion nightmare. The egg's total health pool equals the boss's total health pool. Let me say that again. The egg has the same HP as the boss. You literally cannot kill Beleren in a single egg phase. It's mathematically impossible. Multiple rebirth cycles are required by design, and that matters because of Ashen Benediction. Every single time Beleren hatches back from its egg, it applies Ashen Benediction to the entire raid. That's a permanent stacking increase to damage taken from the boss's mechanics. Permanent, it stacks. First rebirth, every ability hits a little harder. Second rebirth, harder still. Third, your health bars start looking like they're melting. The fight is literally designed to get more punishing every cycle with zero way to stop it. Your raid isn't dying because they're standing in bad. They're dying because the encounter decided everything should hurt more now. Layer on top of that Burning Heart, a passive aura that ticks raid-wide damage every 3 seconds for the entire fight. During Phoenix form, it's manageable. During egg form, it intensifies dramatically, slamming the raid with amplified damage at the exact moment. Every tick already hits harder thanks to Ashen Benediction stacks. Cool. That's also a thing that happened, but wait, before you even worry about the damage taken death spiral, you need to deal with the feather system. During Phoenix form, players get assigned either a light feather or a void feather. Whichever one you have reduces incoming damage of that type by 50%. Sounds helpful, right? It is. Until infused quills start firing. Infused quills target random players with either light or void beams. If a beam hits someone with the matching feather color, they take the reduced damage and, everything's fine. If it hits someone with the wrong color, that player eats a 50% damage increase instead. So the raid has to constantly intercept beams, making sure the right colored player steps in front of the right colored quill, while everything permanently hits harder each cycle, while Burning Heart is ticking, while you're trying to maximize DPS on an egg that refuses to die. Hey, could you stand in front of that light beam for me? I'm a void guy. Sure, I'll just dodge the other 4 mechanics happening simultaneously. The community had real debates about this one. Some players loved it, calling it one of the most elegant, soft enraged mechanics in years, a timer that doesn't feel like a timer. Others pointed out that it disproportionately punishes groups with slightly lower DPS. Since every extra rebirth cycle doesn't just add time, it actively makes the fight harder in a way you can't outplay. You either kill it fast enough or the math buries you. There's no clever trick. There's no defensive cooldown rotation that solves taking 40% more damage from everything, and honestly, that's what makes the fight memorable. Like, it's a genuine coordination gauntlet where your feather assignments, your DPS optimization during egg phases, and your cooldown planning all have to sync perfectly, because every wasted second compounds into a harder fight. The Phoenix keeps rising, and every time it does, your margin for error shrinks. But if Beleren is the opening act of March on Quel'Danas, the finale is something else entirely. Because the last boss of Midnight Season 1 doesn't just test your raid, it tries to drown it. Midnight falls. Lura is the final boss of March on Quel'Danas, the final encounter of Midnight Season 1, and one of the most mechanically dense fights Blizzard has shipped in years. This is the curtain call. Everything the raid tier built toward horde ends here and the encounter knows it. 3 phases. Phase 1 is ground combat, Phase 2 is a 30-second intermission called Total Eclipse, and Phase 3 is the finale where everything you've saved either pays off or doesn't. Simple enough on paper, absolutely not simple in practice. Let's start with the thing that kills the most people, Heaven's Glaives. These are rotating blade attacks that spawn, bounce off the arena walls, and just drift around the room like they're on a casual Sunday stroll. Except each one will shred you if you're standing in the wrong spot. The ricocheting is the problem. You can dodge the initial spawn and then walk directly into the same glaive 4 seconds later because it bounced off a wall you weren't watching. Cool. That's also a thing that happened. Tanks, meanwhile, get to deal with Heaven's Lance, stacking debuff that requires a swap at 5 stacks. Each application of Impale increases subsequent Heaven's Lance damage, so if your co-tank is asleep at the wheel, you're just eating progressively harder hits until you're a stain on the floor, which is, you know, not ideal. But here's where it gets complicated. Midnight Crystals spawn during specific phases and cast Cosmic Fracture, dealing 372,965 cosmic damage to every player in the raid, plus an additional 186,483 cosmic damage every second for 10 seconds after that. So basically a nuke followed by a slightly smaller nuke that doesn't stop nuking. Your healers are gonna love this one. Then there are the Dusk Crystals. These need to be healed to full health to transform into Dawn Crystals. Dawn Crystals are then consumed via an extra action button to create Dawn Light barriers, and those barriers are the only things standing between your raid and instant death during Dark Archangel in Phase 3. Miss a crystal, don't heal one in time, forget to press the button, everyone dies. There's zero margin for error on this resource management, and guilds have to plan their crystal expenditure across all 3 phases or face an unavoidable wipe. It's basically a puzzle layered on top of a boss fight, layered on top of a healing check. And then there's Black Tide. This is the headline mechanic, the one that makes the entire fight feel like the arena is eating itself. Black Tide is a frontal cone that creates permanent puddles, not temporary, not fading, permanent. They last the entire fight. 3 full sets of Black Tide will cover the entire arena floor. That's your Hardened Rage. The room literally shrinks beneath your feet with every cast, and if your raid doesn't kill Lura before the 3rd set finishes, there's nowhere left to stand. Fight over. Hey, where do I go? Nowhere. The answer is nowhere. The encounter received post-launch nerfs, which tells you everything you need to know about the original tuning. And like Blizzard looked at the data, looked at the kill rates, and went, yeah, we overcooked this one. The combination of permanent puddles shrinking your arena, ricocheting glaives filling whatever space you have left, crystal resource management requiring phase-by-phase planning, and a tank mechanic that punishes even a single missed swap made this fight borderline unreasonable at launch. Like, by this point in the research, I was honestly impressed anyone killed it week 1, but that's exactly what a season finale should be. Midnight Falls doesn't just ask you to execute mechanics, it asks you to manage a shrinking arena, budget-limited resources across 3 phases, keep 2 tanks alive through escalating damage, heal through 372,965 damage nukes with 10-second aftershocks, and dodge bouncing glaives that have zero respect for your personal space. All at the same time, it is without question the most mechanically intricate encounter in the entire raid tier and a fitting end to everything Midnight Season 1 threw at us. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.